My name is Evangelist David Hepp, and I'd like to talk to you today about two allegories, types and shadows. They have actually to do with your life today, but actually start out with Abraham. And these two allegories, well, it starts off with Abraham. He's got a wife named Sarah, as you probably know. She had to wait till she was 90 years old to conceive the promise of the Lord. Abraham was 100 years old before this promise came to pass. And so they get this promise, and that they're going to have this child, and so they had to wait a long time for this promise to come. Well, meanwhile, while they're waiting for this promise, Sarah says, here, take Hagar, my handmaid, and lay with her to wife. And she wanted to give Abraham the son, and she was wanting a child, so she gives Hagar. Well, Hagar represents bondage because she was her bondwoman. So she represents bondage, okay? And Sarah giving Hagar for him to lay with represents not faith. So you're doing something that's not really of faith, and you're trying. It's just something. And what it is it's holding Abraham off. Because Abraham is wanting this child. So this is something that, kind of, while you're waiting on God and while you're waiting for the promise, it's something to kind of hold you kind of together. And that's what Ishmael represents. Ishmael represents that very thing. Something that he was the son that held things together for Abraham until the promise came. Well, that being said, in due time, Isaac comes. Well, when Isaac comes, for a brief moment there, they were together. For a brief moment, Isaac and Ishmael dwelled together, and there was some animosity between Sarah and Hagar. Some issues there, and so, Hagar was kind of, did some things to kind of upset Sarah. So Sarah, she went to Abraham. She says, you need to send this woman away. Well, of course, Abraham wasn't going to have that. That's his son and his mother. And God came to Abraham and he says, you need to send away the bondwoman and her child. What does this represent? The bondwoman came not by faith. It was but it was sufficient for the time to hold Abraham over until the point in time when the promise would come. And when the promise came, they tried to dwell together, Ishmael and Isaac, and it just didn't work. And God said, listen to your wife and send the bondwoman away and her child. And that's exactly what we're at today. We as the human family, or as the people of God, in time, we're waiting for the promise. So we needed something to kind of hold us over until the promise came, and that's the law. The law was our schoolmaster. It was something to kind of, you're not supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that. It kind of helped you have a little bit of a guideline until the time the point of promise was to come. The promise, seed, the true seed. When God promised Abraham that in your seed all nations shall be blessed, it wasn't Isaac like we thought. And it was, because, Israel blessed the nations, but spiritually there was something deeper than that, and that was Christ. And his seed was Christ. And so when Christ came, when the appointed time came, by faith, Christ is now here. Well, at the beginning, the disciples tried to keep the law and Christ, representing the two seeds, the law and grace. And they tried to do both, and they tried to say it was needful that you circumcise and keep the law of Moses and, grace. Well, that's not the way it's supposed to be. And just like God said, send away the bondwoman, the bondage. The law represents bondage because it's pretty tough. You try to keep the law. I think even Peter said neither us nor our fathers were able to bear it. So when you try to keep the two, Ishmael and Isaac, together, you got problems. You got problems. And God said, send the bondwoman away and her child. And Paul said that the law was a schoolmaster until faith came. And now that faith has come, we're in no need of a schoolmaster. You don't need Somebody telling you, thou shalt not steal under grace. You say, well, does that mean I'm allowed to steal now? Because in this new covenant, God has given you the spirit of grace and the spirit of love. And the spirit of love says, love your neighbor as yourself. And to love your Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And see, love fulfills and hangs the whole law. And under this new covenant, we have it. You move by, well, is stealing from my neighbor loving my neighbor? Is coveting my neighbor's wife loving my neighbor? Is committing adultery loving my neighbor? Is murder loving my neighbor? Is bowing down to another God loving the Lord God with all my heart, mind, soul, and strength? Because Jesus said, what is the greatest commandments? And one man said, well, to love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And he said, and all your mind. And Jesus said, and love your neighbor as yourself. And this is true. This is what it's all about. It's about love. That's what it's about. And people are trying to keep feast days, and trying to keep Sabbath days, and they're trying to, I want to talk to you about one more thing too, and it's the tithing law. This is a pretty deep one. This is a pretty hard one. Tithing. Paying your tithes. You hear preachers sometimes say, you gotta pay your tithes. You gotta pay your tithes. Are we supposed to tithe under grace? Well, somebody said, well, in the book of Malachi it says that you're cursed. That if you don't, he said, trying to improve me, but you're cursed because you robbed God. The book of Malachi was written to a people, the nation of Israel, that was under the law. They were Ishmael. So the way they were holding their child. Now, you say, well, if we don't have to pay tithes, then how's the church going to operate? Well, it's a whole different type of a scenario now. Under the law, when you would give your tithes, it would go to Levi, who was a priest that was not allowed to own lands and things, and that all he did was service upon the Lord. So does your pastor that you give your tithes to, does he own the house? Does he own lands? Does he? You get my point. What I'm saying. You can't take the law, Levitical priesthood, giving tithes to the Levitical priesthood, which in return helps him to make the sacrifices into the service, and he didn't own lands or anything like that. And now you're going to take that law and enforce it over here in grace and say, oh, you have to pay your tithes. God said so. Now, let me make this clear before you lose me here and say, well, why shouldn't we have to give money to the Lord? No, we're not saying that's not the message that God is giving. God teaches us that he that sows sparingly shall also reap sparingly. So you gotta know that it's no more you're cursed if you don't give to God. That's not the message. The message is you're blessed if you do. And the more you give, the more you're blessed. He said, he that soweth sparingly, he that gives sparingly, he shall also reap sparingly. He that soweth plentifully shall reap plentifully. So it's turned from giving by commandment. You have to give, or you're cursed. It's turned from that to giving by faith. The Bible says the Lord loves a cheerful giver. So yeah, we still give. We still give unto the Lord. Is it 10%? It's whatever's in your heart. Whatever you purpose in your heart. Whatever God lays in your heart. But I'll say this. If you give, well, look at the disciples. They took, the early church, you see what they took? They just sold everything and gave it to the disciples. Is that a law? No, you don't see that. In the book of Acts, people think that when someone does something in the book of Acts, that's what we all have to do. Well, the early church sold everything and they gave it to the Lord, so we've got to do that. No. The early church was moved by the Spirit of God, and they acted as the Spirit of God moved on them. And it was recorded, and it was historical in the book of Acts. Now, what is God moving on you to do? Is he moving on you to sell everything and give it to him? And give it to the apostles' feet? Well, then, hey, that's what you need to do. Is he moving on you saying, 10% is what you need to do? Well, then do that. Is it 20%, 15%, 5%? What is God telling you? What is God telling you? And you'll know your heart. You got a conscience. You got a heart. You know what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. And you don't need somebody telling you 10% or you're cursed. You don't need that. All you need to know is that the more you give, the more you're blessed. And if you're not giving enough, you're not going to feel good about it. Some of you don't give nothing to God. Some of you don't give nothing to God. And you know what? You're struggling. You're struggling just to survive. You're struggling. You're so not blessed that you're struggling. And you can't figure out why you're living from check to check, bill to bill, and you make enough money to really do it, but it's just seeming to not really work. That's because, you're not blessing God. You're not honoring God with your substance. And, does that mean you're cursed? I don't know. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. I would just say you're just lacking in blessings. And that's what faith is. He that believeth he that cometh to God must first believe, and believe that he's a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. God is a God of faith, and this is the time of faith. And the law was our schoolmaster until faith come. Now faith's here. So you got to send away the bondwoman and her child.